Good day, everybody. Thank you for joining. People are still filing in, and some of you don't have your cameras on, but we're assembling our group and also streaming live on YouTube on this occasion, the second anniversary of the landmark Supreme Court decision on Dobbs striking down Roe versus Wade. And Lauren Leader and I are here today to talk with you and to let you talk to Celinda Lake, who's one of the best pollsters in the Democratic Party, one of the best strategists in the Democratic Party, and someone who understands this issue super well. I want to say at the beginning, we're going to talk about the politics of this, but I want to make sure it's clear everybody understands that this is an important policy issue for millions of Americans, tens of millions on all sides. And anyone who's covered this issue or worked on this issue knows that there's passionate pro-choice people in this country, passionate pro-life people, and the extremes on both sides feel really strongly. Lots of Americans have complicated issues, feelings about this, thoughts about this. But we're going to talk, as we always do, in two-way about this in a respectful way. We're here to learn and understand, not to have fights. And we're also here, again, to be respectful of the fact that people feel really strongly about this issue. I feel strongly about this issue because I know how strongly so many Americans do. So, Linda, thank you for joining. I want to first clarify and allow folks to understand it's been announced that you're working with the Biden effort, presidential effort, but talk about what that relationship is and then make clear that you're speaking for yourself today. So that's on the record.
Yes. So I'm part of the polling team. There are many pollsters on the polling team, but everything I'm saying today is as an individual, not on behalf of the campaign. And thank you, Mark, for making that clear.
Belinda, talk about what you wonder about how the issue of abortion rights will play in this campaign. What are things you don't think you fully know the answer to?
Well, let me start with what we do know the answer to, which is I think it will play a major, major role. And I think it will play a major role because it is a very important voting issue to a lot of people. Post-Dobbs is the first time where we have more single issue pro-choice people than single issue right to life people, and that has continued. We also have initiatives on a number of the states, which increases the power of the issue. It is a major mobilization issue for some constituencies that we have some real issues with: younger women of color, younger women, younger Democratic women, unmarried women under 55. These are all groups that we have some major turnout issues, so it'll be very important in that regard. It's an issue that people think they can, like, who can tell who's good on inflation, right? I mean, they both say they're going to do things differently. What's the policy that's key to inflation? Hard to judge. On abortion, particularly post Roe v. Wade being overturned, it's very easy, and voters are in the mood. Just cut all the chatter and just tell me where you're at. And people are very clear about what they want. They want a national guarantee. They want miscarriage care, contraception, abortion protected. They think this is a personal decision that should be made by the government or by politicians, particularly older white male politicians on their behalf. So we know a lot about this issue. Some of the things that I think we don't know are exactly how it will play out in the interaction with candidates, particularly in initiative states. A second thing we don't fully know is it's pretty clear where young women are at, but it's less clear where young men are at. Young men were voting the issue very strongly, but less clear right now, and they're voting the democracy issue. Is it part of the democracy bucket? Does it overcome other tensions in the young male population? So that's something that we're not as sure about. And then I think many Republicans are trying to mute their positions. They're trying to achieve a different profile. And will they be successful? And I think to date, they've had a very hard time. The Republicans went through the stage where going to be the party of babies, and that lasted 2 days. Trump tried to say we're going to do states' rights, and then Arizona proved that states can be absolutely crazy. They tried to do 15-week ban. Americans are not very good at math, not sure how many weeks there are in a pregnancy, but rejecting that overwhelmingly in Virginia once they started to think about how unique each pregnancy is and how something can go wrong at any point in a pregnancy. So there's just a lot of churning on the Republican side. You see it with Larry Hogan in the DC, Maryland market. And what's going to happen in terms of that, I think, is a question.
I mean, look, I think part of what Celinda's getting at is that there has been this just epic sea change in kind of some very regular rules of politics that have applied for really since Reagan, right? Which was that the pro-life movement was highly galvanizing on the right, buoyed and supported by, by Christian conservatives. And in this moment where they have essentially won the biggest victory that they were pursuing for my whole life, there is, I think, a total reckoning because none of the rules of politics that have applied for the last 50 years now apply. And that is exactly what Celinda said first and foremost, which is that the shoe is on the other foot. The issue that was the galvanizing, mobilizing, voting, sort of voter turnout issue on the right for the last 50 years is now one of the top voting, mobilizing issues on the left. And I think that the Republican politics has not quite caught up to that reality, in that even among pro-life Americans, people who strongly find abortion to be morally repugnant, there are still these sands that have shifted where we're seeing in traditionally very red states folks willing to come out to secure the rights of people to access abortion care when it comes to healthcare emergencies. And I think what we're seeing with some of these ballot initiatives, what we've seen in red state after red state after red state, has proven that really, in a way, what the pro-choice movement never really had until now is this incredibly strong and vivid and very real argument about why abortion is fundamentally healthcare, and that it is for sure in certain instances a family planning question, but the whole landscape of this topic, has so radically changed. And I think neither party has completely figured it out yet, but I think for sure Republicans are behind the 8 ball. And we're seeing this in a lot of these Senate campaigns. You see it in, Rick Scott, even this week, Rick Scott got a lot of grief, and it was sort of fact checked live on Twitter that Rick Scott put out, for instance, an ad saying that he was strongly in favor of both IVF and contraception. But as the, viewer, as Twitter pointed out, he voted against bills that would have secured those. So, Americans are wise to a lot of this stuff now. And I think there is a lot of catching up on both sides to figure out exactly for Democrats how to continue capitalizing on it in the ways that they have in every cycle, really in the last, since Dobbs, every election really since Dobbs, and for Republicans to figure out how do we readjust when Americans, the vast majority of Americans, even in states that were reliably pro-life, are really uncomfortable with how far things have gone.
Thank you so much. And I'm so sorry for having that coffee. Thank you. And thank you, Lauren. One thing that Lauren's comments reminded me of, we also don't know how this translates into voting the Supreme Court issue. The Supreme Court issue has always been an issue that the right has voted on, but the left has not. If Trump is reelected, or whoever the next president is going to have the opportunity probably to make 2 or 3 judges on the court. That could produce a 7-2 Trump court for the rest of our lives, or it could produce a more balanced court, 4 for Biden, 5 from the Trump side. So this is a very critical issue, and it'll be interesting to see if progressive voters, become as energized around the Supreme Court as right-wing voters have been, which has not been true in the past.
Celinda,
I think that's such an important point, Celinda. Sorry, I was just going to say, Mark, I think that's a profoundly important point because, part of the frustration, I think, for organizers on the left over many years was that Americans did not take seriously 2 things. They didn't take seriously that Roe could ever be overturned, and they didn't take seriously that the implications of the presidents for the Supreme Court would have a direct impact on their lives. I have heard that my entire life from women my age and younger. And I think the question that Celinda asked is a really good one, is does that change now? Do people believe that now because of Roe, or because of the end of the Roe, that actually there could be an end to the right to contraception, or that gay marriage through Oberfeld could be in danger, or that IVF might no longer be a secured right? And do Americans now appreciate in a different way that the Supreme Court is critical to all of those things? And we don't know the answer yet, because for the last number of years, that has not been something that turned people out on the left. And I'm not sure that it does yet, but we're going to find out.
Linda, as a practitioner, I know you're not going to want to give away every secret, but what is the way that the Biden campaign, the DNC, other pro-choice candidates, what is the way that they activate people to care enough about those two issues to vote, and to vote for the Democratic pro-choice candidates? Is it a matter of just ads on social media? Is it the rhetoric of the candidates? What is it that activates someone to care about the two things that Lauren pointed out?
Well, I think the Supreme Court strategy is up for grabs, and I think there's a lot of work being done on that. First of all, one thing that is clear, many people do not know how many judges are on the Supreme Court. So it's important to say to people, there's only 9 judges on the Supreme Court. Right now, people are more focused when it comes to the Supreme Court on the gifts and bribes, et cetera, for Thomas and Alito than they are, frankly, on the ideological position. So I don't know about the Supreme Court. The abortion strategy is pretty clear, and you see Democrats engaging on it now. It's impossible to be a Democratic candidate right now if you're not fully pro-abortion. They make it clear that they want a national guarantee, and voters by 2-1 want a national guarantee. They don't want to leave it up to the states. They're very worried, even if you're in a so-called safe state, about the implications. Contraception, you have 2 pools of people. One of the things that's interesting about contraception is it's particularly strong with Latinas. Many Anglo women think, well, they're never going to outlaw contraception. And of course, the recent medication abortion decision kind of reaffirmed that. But Latinas say, oh, yeah, that's exactly what happened in Mexico, exactly what happened in Central America. When abortion was illegal, contraception was illegal too. And Latinos are very, very, very committed to contraception, even those who have some ambivalent feelings about abortion. So it's interesting. And then you have miscarriage care. You have African-American voters, women in particular, who will say because of child maternal health differences, that this is a question of life and death. This is not just a question of having an abortion. So this is rippling out, and I think the contours of the debate are pretty set. It's why these initiatives have passed everywhere and are likely to pass everywhere that they're on the ballot. Florida is a little unclear because they've raised the threshold to 60%, but if the threshold were 50%, it would surely win. It's right now pulling well over 60%. So I think the contours of the abortion issue are set. It's going to be aggressively used. It's a clear contrast, and it's going to be used in mobilization and persuasion. And you have a new population out there, right? You have the young women who are very committed. You have suburban women and independent women who are very committed. You also have seniors more committed than they've ever been, because today's seniors are the baby boomers. They're not the silent generation. And the baby boomers remember when abortion was illegal. Many baby boomers have experience having helped someone when in their teen years get an abortion or interacted in some way. So this is very, very salient to the baby boomers. And then I think, I'm not always a big believer in personal stories, but I think this is a case where the personal stories have made a huge difference. And the power of these stories, particularly coming out of Texas, have been game-changing for people. And people can volunteer these stories right away. They rip through the public consciousness. So it's advertising, it's social media, it's the clear contrast. It's already out there. And many Republicans, particularly the MAGA Republicans, keep keeping this issue alive by trying to do the craziest things, and by saying the craziest things, and by voting in a way that contradicts where they want to go.
Can I ask a question, Mark, of Celinda?
Yes,
So Celinda, I mean, obviously you and I talk about this all day, every day. I could keep going on and on and on. I'm curious about one of my frustrations given all of that, and I agree with you wholeheartedly, but one of my frustrations is that I think the Biden administration, and I was on with Alexis McGill Johnson this morning, and my frustration is that I think they haven't clearly articulated what they plan to do. And one of the reasons is because there's not an obvious answer, right? Like if we were to work towards a constitutional amendment, which ultimately is the only way to really secure abortion rights, that's a 50-year plan. The court, they may or may not have the opportunity to put new seats on the court. And even if they do, what does that mean? Will there be a case that they would take? And then, of course, the question of whether or not it's even viable to pass federal abortion protections, given the makeup of what is likely to be a very closely held Senate and House. I feel, as somebody who works on this every day, that I can't really articulate what the Biden administration means when they say restore Roe. They want to continue to paint this contrast, but I'm not sure they've convinced people that there's a clear-cut path or an answer. What do you think? Do you think voters are asking for that? Does it matter that they can't really answer that question? Or is it enough, you think, that they're just painting the contrast and that things could get worse? And that if Americans believe that it could get worse under Trump, that that's enough to turn them out? Or do they need to do a better job of articulating, like, what does it mean when Biden puts up a giant sign that says restore Roe?
There's a lot of contingent planning here, but I do think that what the administration has made clear, and particularly Vice President Harris, is they are going to use every tool available to them, and they've already been doing that. But they're going to be aggressive if they can get the Congress as well in trying to do an executive order and hoping that that will be upheld, appointing judges who will support the restoration of Roe v. Wade, etc. So I think the actions are a little bit dependent on the political configuration, and nobody knows what that's going to be. It's also going to play out in 2026 because you're going to have 36 governors up in 2026. And these governors are going to be asked the same question the president's asking, even though people want national legislation. They're going to be state legislatures up. They're going to be AG races up. And it's noticeable this issue is already playing out in the two major AG races that exist, Pennsylvania and North Carolina. So basically, the Democratic strategy is to flood the system and try to look for every place that they can make a difference. But I do think that voters are getting a little frustrated because they don't particularly understand the process. Why haven't you done something? Yes, I'm clear about your position, but why didn't you do something? And I think that frustration probably increases in 25 and 26. The key here is people do think it can get worse. And of course, the Supreme Court reaffirms that. We have a decision coming up soon about
the Idaho
jailing
decision
out of Idaho. And we have the contraception vote. So every day you have something that indicates how it can get worse. And these state legislatures are crazy. And so they do things that reaffirm we need a national law. I mean, the great irony about IVF, the majority of people who get IVF are Republican women, Republican families, because it's expensive to get IVF. And so Democrats often can't afford it. So I think it is evolving. I think that particularly after, maybe not for 2024 so much, but after 2024, people are going to be looking for action for sure.
And we'll see how much it galvanizes around the state houses, because I think you're right. I mean, Republicans have dominated state house races, and to their credit, have done an extraordinary job, packing state houses and building multi-year, decades-long strategies to pack state houses in ways that are not necessarily even representative of what the majority in their states want on this issue. So I think it's going to be really interesting to see if, when I go out across the country, most Americans really have no clue who's in their state house. They don't know who represents them. They don't even know that those races are happening. So, as you said, it's kind of whack-a-mole. There's so many different fronts in this fight. And I think it's hard for Democrats to articulate where to direct the energy outside of just vote for Biden.
If you've got a question.
One thing I know also is another race that it plays a role in. About half the states have elected Supreme Court justices. About half the states do not. But in all of the Supreme Court justice races that we've had, Wisconsin, Montana, Pennsylvania, this issue has played a major, major role. So where people can vote this and make a difference, they do.
Yeah.
If you've got a question or want to make a comment about this topic, please raise your electronic hand. I'll ask you to if you're called on, unmute yourself, turn on your camera if it's not on, if possible. And we wait for some more hands to come up. I'm going to ask you, Celinda, two presidential questions. One is, what do voters think about Donald Trump's position that it should be left up to the states? He spent a lot of time trying to come up with a politically acceptable position. Is that a good position for the general election electorate?
No, by 2-1, people want it nationally guaranteed for a variety of reasons. They don't want people having to travel from state to state, and there have been some horrific stories in that regard.
Yeah.
And then what really helped us, and who could have thought, is that he came out with that statement, and then 2 weeks later, Arizona went back not to 1964, but to 1864, proving that the states are absolutely crazy, and in part because of who's taken over the states. So people have zero confidence in the states now. They want to make it national. They're also, this is a very mobile country. So a lot of moms, for example, worried about their daughters who are going to college in a state where this is not legal, and et cetera, et cetera. A lot of young women choosing where to go to college and where to take a job based on what are the abortion laws. So no, people do not want this state by state. They want a national guarantee.
Okay. And then both Western states that are battleground states, in theory, are going to have ballot measures protecting. We've been sort of led to believe for a while that would make those races more competitive. What's your sense of that?
I think it will make those races more competitive. And both of those states are extremely, extremely pro-abortion. They're libertarian-oriented states. And there are a lot of men in those states that think, but I'm from Montana originally, and it was like, before you even get to women's health and personal decisions, it's like, butt out. It's none of your effing business. And you had a lot of men in those states who feel that way. So I think it's very galvanizing. You also have Senate races underneath that presidential race in both states where this is a clear battleground. So it'll make a lot of difference in those states, I think.
I think Arizona, I mean, we saw it on Friday, this release. If you haven't seen it, it was in the New York Times, but the Kaiser Family Foundation does this really extraordinary poll, which I'm pretty sure Celinda had to have written, just having read it, right? Yeah, okay, good guess. That Celinda probably wrote. I can now tell, that's how much we've worked together over the years. I can tell when it's a Celinda poll. But it's really interesting because what the poll shows is that in the states that have ballot initiatives, voters are significantly more galvanized to turn out at the polls. Like, it is a differentiator. And I think, again, question about Florida, how galvanizing, but I don't think there's any question that in Arizona, it will be the ball game, and I think will help Biden enormously, given he won there the last time. Celinda Lake polling is very bad. She's not Celinda Lake. Oh my God, I just called her Celinda Lake. Carrie Lake. My bad. I'm so sorry. Carrie Lake is underwater. A different lake, a very different lake. Carrie Lake is underwater. So I think, it's really fascinating. Like, we just keep seeing this in poll after poll after poll. These are not outliers. You just keep seeing that where people have the chance to vote on it, they will come out and do it.
Great. Okay. Charles, I'm going to call on you first. Again, if you've got questions, please raise your hands and join in. A question for Celinda or comment or whatever you'd like to do on this topic. Charles, go ahead. Charles cannot hear you for some reason, even though you seem to have unmuted. Let's see if you can solve that puzzle.
Got me now?
Yes, sir.
Yep.
Perfect. Awesome. So I follow Professor Scott Galloway, and he says out in Europe, I mean, there are equally conservative forces. Why is this an issue here, but not there? What is the motivation of the right?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. I follow the research too. I'm fascinated by it. I think part of it is that the European right does not have the evangelical Christians the way we do, or the charismatic Catholics for that matter. They have Catholics, but they don't have charismatic Catholics. And so I think that's part of, I'm not an expert on this, but I think that's part of the root of it.
Yeah.
This has been a battleground since Roe v. Wade was passed. And Lauren made the right point of the, conscious strategy of Ronald Reagan, who was very secular, honestly, but his conscious strategy to use the evangelical right as a way to gain power and solidify power. So we have that faction that's been very dominant on our side that they don't have in Europe.
Well, and it's a largely secular society, a much more secular society in Europe than it is here. I mean, church going at a century low, engagement with the church extremely low, and there's extreme suspicion of religious interference in the political process, certainly in places like France and Germany and elsewhere. So, it's not an accident that France passed the only constitutional amendment in the world immediately after Dobbs protecting the right to abortion. And it is in part, they did it almost immediately after as a response to what happened in the United States out of a fear that kind of thing could happen in Europe, where there are a different political orientation. It passed with overwhelming support and a huge national support. So, it's just Celinda hit the nail on the head. The injection of sort of Christian nationalism into American politics is very religiously based. It is much more ideologically based in Europe, much more around national identity than it is around religious theology. Great question.
Thank you, guys.
Great question. Great answers. Thank you, Charles. John Cox, unmute, please. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was wondering if in your polling, ladies, if you had ever asked questions relative to the modern world. I mean, in the modern world today, birth control is pretty readily available, whether it be condoms, whether it be the pill. I mean, it's available at every Planned Parenthood location. And it would seem that you'd have to be pretty ignorant or careless to get pregnant these days to some degree. The other part of that equation is that a lot of abortions are being performed on underage girls. The abortion clinics are said to be one of the best refuges for rapists. I'm the father of 4 daughters, and I find it extremely objectionable when I hear about young girls who are brought to abortion clinics, and of course, being done to protect the men more than anything else. Do you ever ask questions related to those 2 issues?
Celinda, should I take this one?
Yeah, I'd love you to start.
First of all, the contraceptive issue is a complete red herring. It has absolutely nothing to do with this discussion. Contraception is not foolproof, first and foremost. Second of all, the biggest issue, and Celinda spoke about this previously, in terms of the healthcare catastrophe that's been wrought by Dobbs, is not people who didn't want their pregnancies. It's actually people who did want their pregnancies. Families who wanted children, who had devastating medical consequences because of a miscarriage or other fetal abnormalities, that actually were facing permanent sterility if they were not able to get an emergency abortion in order to, in some cases, save the life and the fertility of the mother, not to mention important or critical organs. That's what's at stake in the Idaho case. It's not a question about whether or not women have been careless and gotten pregnant accidentally. The real world reality of what abortion care is today, in many cases, is enabling families who want children to be able to have them. And that, I think, has been a really important set of stories that have come out of places like Texas and elsewhere, where women who had wanted pregnancies were not going to survive if they couldn't get care because of an ectopic pregnancy or other complications. So that's the first thing. And I think the second thing is that when it comes to underage girls, there is a critical question about whether or not, especially women who have been victims of domestic violence, rape, etc., can access care sometimes when that has been perpetrated by someone even in their own family. And in states where young girls are required to have parental consent, they're often being forced to have unwanted pregnancies that actually in some cases may actually be the pregnancy of an immediate family member. So, what happens with these talking points, and Celinda can bring this home, we can all think of exceptions that are potentially something we don't agree with morally. But when we try to legislate this, what winds up happening is that the real world consequences of people's lives, which are often somewhere in a gray zone in the middle, get lost. And that's how you wind up with the 14-year-old girl in Mississippi who was forced to have a pregnancy, even though Mississippi has a law that theoretically exempts, that allows abortion in case of rape. Well, in the case of a 14-year-old girl from a poor community, her family didn't know how to get that exception. And this poor 14-year-old who is in the 7th grade has been forced to have her rapist's baby. So I think one of the things that has changed in this debate is that we all understand that there are moral limits and we can each decide what those are. But when the government gets involved in deciding where those moral lines are, lots of people get left behind and lots of really terrible unintended consequences become part of the landscape. And I think that's
All
what's
of those,
becoming the national.
all of those are all regrettable, of course, and the exception rather than the rule, and should be dealt with. And the only issue with a national law is that you're denying states the ability to define murder and define a life for themselves. And that kind of takes away that democratic right from those states. And so, there's
Well,
two
I think a
sides to
lot
all
of
this.
people would, for sure, and look, as we said, we all have closely held views on this, but I think ultimately, and this is why it's such a passionate issue for libertarians, I don't particularly want politicians deciding what my doctor should do. And I don't want to have to argue with an elected official about my healthcare when it's maybe life and death. And my doctor doesn't have the ability to save my life because some politician isn't well informed enough. And I think that's what's really changed in this national debate, is that now Americans are really understanding that in a deeply personal way, right? That is the problem with legislating it, because it's gray. It is not a black and white issue. It never has been.
And a lot of people understand too that when you cheapen life and allow abortion on demand, you then have a philosophy of cheapening life all throughout the country, and that's a dangerous slope as well. Thank you.
Thank you, John.
One thing
Celinda,
I
do you want to go ahead, Celinda? Go ahead.
I just wanted to add one minor correction, which is, or not minor, major in my mind. Planned Parenthood, et cetera, and abortion clinics, but let's talk about Planned Parenthood, the one I'm most familiar with. They are not protectors of rapists. They are mandatory reporters of child abuse and rape, and they actually provide counseling. So quite the contrary. They are the ones who are really trying to help the young girl, as you were saying, Lauren. It's often family members or family friends, and simultaneously provide needed health care. And I think the bottom line is, how can you make this decision for someone else when you don't know them? You don't know their situation, you don't know them. And why would a white male politician, frankly, be the one who should make this decision for someone? It should be the person, it should be their doctor, it should be their faith leader, it should be the family. It should not be some politician sitting in a state capitol.
Katie Reeves had a question in the chat. Katie, I wonder if you want to come on camera and raise it, or if not, I'll do it for you, but I'll give you a second if you want to turn your camera on and let me unmute you. So the question that Katie raised is, if, as you say, the country's 2-to-1 wanting a federal law,
it's a great question.
Why isn't there one? And of course, you see this on gun safety laws too, right? The polling's pretty overwhelming. So is it the incompetence of Democratic legislators? Is it the rules of the Congress, Celinda? Why isn't that public opinion manifested itself in law?
Yeah, really, really good question. And number one, we have Republican-controlled Congress and a House, and unfortunately, it's controlled by the MAGA faction of the Republican Party. I was born and raised a Republican. I was a teenage Republican, which is like saying you're a werewolf on my side of the aisle. But my family was always pro-abortion and pro-choice. So there was a huge faction of Republicans who were in the Lisa Murkowski tradition, for example. And now you can count on the numbers of one hand. They've been pushed out, defeated, primaried, etc. So we have a Republican House. We have the filibuster, which is another complicated issue. I think many of us are for doing away with the filibuster, but it's a divided concept. And then we have a Supreme Court that is not balanced, and people want to balance the Supreme Court. So it's structural right now, but it does not reflect the public opinion. And where people, Lauren said it best, when people have the opportunity to vote this issue, they have been extraordinarily clear about what their preference is.
I mean, Celinda's right. Like, obviously, we don't, there isn't enough of a majority in the House or the Senate right now to do that. I think some of us on the left are very frustrated that President Obama, when he had control of both houses of Congress, didn't take the issue seriously enough to try to pass national abortion protections at that time. Who knows whether they would have held up in court, but still, like, that was an opportunity that was missed. And if you do the sort of look back, that should have happened when there was Democratic control. So shame on President Obama for not having taken that issue seriously. It was a very different time in the country. I don't know that he would have had the votes then either. But you also have to look at what's happening in the state legislatures. And I always like to use North Carolina as one example. Mark and I have been doing really interesting focus groups in North Carolina. But North Carolina is a state very, very purple with a Democratic governor. And right now there's a Republican supermajority in the North Carolina State House by one vote because of one person who switched parties from Democrat to Republican after having been elected. And in that state, they passed a very restrictive abortion ban against the will of 70 to 80% of North Carolinians who believed that they had voted for pro-choice Democrats when they went to the polls. So there are some very serious structural problems around the country that have to be dealt with. When I talk about, I'm very balanced in my criticism of both parties. I am worried that Biden hasn't been clear enough about how he would pass national abortion protections, even if he wins the Senate, because of the filibuster issue. That's what Nikki Haley was saying. If you watch the debates, Nikki Haley said that a bunch, like, let's be honest, nobody can get this done. So it's a question. Would Biden, forego the filibuster in order to pass abortion rules? I'm told he said he will. I'm skeptical, but, let's see. So there's no silver bullet here, but there's no question that action must be taken.
I think, in fairness too,
good.
that what has happened is just was so unimaginable to people.
Yeah.
And I have to say, even myself, and I fought for Roe v. Wade initially. I participated in high school in getting a friend to Texas, to Mexico because abortion was illegal, all the way from rural Montana. So this is very personal, but I have to say, this is not a country that normally rolls back such fundamental rights. We always go forward, or at least that's the myth we tell ourselves about ourselves. And then to have all of these states act in such insane ways, it's just really, really hard to have processed. And I think it's caught us up short, frankly, time and time again. Well, now we're all, the shades are off. We're all crystal clear about where people are headed. And it's going to be a crystal clear choice in the 2024 elections. Nobody's kidding themselves about where everybody's at now.
We're always first come, first serve here in terms of questions. But I can't help but notice that while there are plenty of women on the call, no one has raised their hand yet. So I'm going to call on Ray, my friend Ray, to ask a question. But I'd urge, if any of the women on here would like to ask a question, we'd love to hear from you for a comment. Ray, go ahead.
Hi, everybody. Thank you very much, Mark. Reference the states should decide issue. It seems to me that the biggest fallacy of that is that half the states do not allow citizens to directly participate in their government through citizens' initiatives or constitutional amendments. So when people talk about democracy and this, that, or the other, the fact of the matter is half the states aren't participating in democracy. Is that, and I don't hear that much. So I wonder, might that be an effective line of communication, especially for the Biden administration, that allows Trump to go on and on and on with the state should decide, that's fine, that's just great.
I think it's a great point, Ray. And coming from Montana and the progressive Western tradition that initiated initiatives, I strongly agree. And I would just add one parenthesis to what you're saying. Several of the states have tried to reduce their right to initiatives before these abortion initiatives come on, and they've been resoundingly rejected by a coalition in each of those states that is Democrats and Republicans. So I think it would be amazing to have every state have initiatives. I think partially the Biden administration doesn't talk that much about it because that is a state issue. And secondly, Joe Biden comes from a state, Delaware, that doesn't have a strong tradition of initiatives. I think if you had a president from an initiative-oriented state, you might hear more about that. But I think you said it beautifully. I am from Montana, an initiative state, and I strongly agree with you.
By the way, I'm from Ohio, and Ohio citizens just passed a constitutional amendment here, Republicans here pulled out all the stops to try to stop it, and they got crushed.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I was going to mention that, and Ohio's an amazing example of that. And I was just there. I was in Cincinnati on Thursday, and they're incredibly proud of what they pulled off, because it did feel like, you know, someone was trying to pull the wool over voters' eyes on that one, and they didn't fall for it, is sort of how they talk about it.
Celinda and Lauren, do you know Britney Prime? My friend Britney Prime, who's up there. Do you guys know her?
Yeah.
So
Hi, Lauren.
Brittany
Yes,
is
hi, Celinda.
Brittany is the most sought after category in America, the pro-choice Republican woman.
Very, very,
Brit-
very eloquent.
Brittany's
go
doing
ahead. The
some
floor
great
is-
work.
The
We've
floor
been
is yours,
talking.
Brittany.
She's doing good stuff.
Well, I wanted to, what was it? New York Times, I think, talked about the Dems having to win women more than losing the men.
Right.
And I think the biggest thing in there that shocked me was that the motivation among Republican women didn't change in the states like Arizona, where it's on the ballot. Do you sense that that could move as it becomes more of a binary choice? Or inflation and economy is always the biggest with the center-right women, but just what's your sense as we go forward?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I saw that too, and the formula is right. We have to win women by more than we lose men. But I will say this, we've seen in every state toward the end that independent women and some Republican suburban women have gone to voting Democratic because of the abortion issue. So I saw those numbers. I'm not sure I completely believe them, but it's not been the pattern when the elections have come back.
Yeah, we talked about that at the beginning. You may have come on. I mean, I dug into this. I spent like the entire weekend looking at those numbers, because I was like, I'm not sure they've shifted quite as much as that. I think it's a very good poll. I'm not sure it's shifted quite as far as they imply. And I think Celinda's right that when it comes down to like the real choice in the real moment, you know, what we've seen so far is that, you know, people are turning out for it across the political spectrum. And I think, you know, Arizona to me is, I have zero doubt that the Arizona ballot initiative is going to pass. And I think it's going to help Ruben Gallego in the process. I think President Biden's going to win the state again because of it. I think we're all not sure. Nobody's really sure about how it plays out in Florida, as Celinda said at the beginning, because it's a higher bar to clear. But I definitely think, you know, I think it's a bit overstated. We've asked the question, much because of Celinda's direction, we've asked the question a little differently. So the way that the Kaiser Foundation asks it is that they keep asking like the top issues, and inflation will continue to be the top issue. But we've asked it differently, which is your deal breaker, meaning I will never vote for somebody who doesn't agree with me on X. And over and over and over again, abortion has been that issue. So I think that, you know, when people think about it as a binary choice, they answer the question a little differently. But I think when you put it to them in terms of like, would I ever support a candidate who was anti-choice? The answer over and over again, overwhelmingly, number one on the list is no.
I've also seen it where, you know, what is your absolute top choice or top issue? 25% of this group say that, but if you say one of the top, it jumps to 75%. So we can hold a few things in our minds at the same time, but
this is where us wonky numbers people get really wonky.
Brittany, you had somebody saying.
Oh, I was going to ask Mark a similar question, and forgive me because I have not seen the story that the three of you are referencing, but to what extent do you think there's a chance in Nevada, Arizona, and Florida of vote splitting where, you know, given how agnostic they are about both candidates and inflation and other things, even though we're talking about it being kind of one thing where you'd say, all right, I'm going to vote for choice on the ballot initiative, but I am going to vote for Trump because I don't really think he's going to overturn this because he's saying everything but I'll overturn it. And they split their, and maybe that's what that story was about and what you're saying. But
No, it's not.
It doesn't talk about that at all. And I just dropped the link to the poll in the chat in case folks want to see it.
Oh, thank you, Lauren. So we've tested that. I was worried about that. I was very worried even in 2022 that people would feel like well, if I vote the issue, then I don't need to vote the candidates. Quite the contrary. Where people have had an initiative, they've actually pressed their candidates to say how they're going to vote on the initiative. And it's actually tied it tighter and made it harder for people to finesse their position, if you will, because people are like, I have to make up my mind, yes or no. Just tell me yes or no. And a lot of candidates try to answer, well, what I want to vote on initiative is a private issue. It's a secret ballot and voters are not having it. It's like, no, just tell me where you're voting on this.
Yeah. And, you really see that. And I think one of the like kind of unsung stories, it's been like it's in the wonka sphere, I guess, but maybe less in the sort of like popular consciousness, is right now, like the Democratic Senate candidates are all outperforming even President Biden. And you see this especially like in Tammy Baldwin's race in Wisconsin. You see it with Ruben Gallego in Arizona. I think that overall, like the ongoing abortion conversations are exponentially helpful to the Democratic Senate candidates. We'll see what that means for Sherrod Brown, because obviously that's going to be one of the closest in the country. But I think it's a really interesting undercurrent here that people understand in a new way the importance of the Senate. As Celinda said, they're asking very straightforward questions. Do you support this or not? And it's really disproportionately helping the favorability of some of these Democratic Senate candidates, which, again, like people understand how critical that is.
Senator Brown, I've gotten 3 press releases from him today related to events around the Dobbs anniversary and being unambiguously pro-choice. It's obviously a mixed state. It was for a long time considered a very pro-life state. So, Celinda, I'm wondering whether is that a risk for him at all politically, or no?
Or Bob Casey, who's similarly historically very pro-life.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, both of those. So first of all, one of the things that's happened is that most states after the Dobbs decision moved 10 points more that was the average, 10 points more pro-abortion. So, and again, the single issue voters are now way more pro-abortion than pro-life. It used to be the pro-life were the single issue voters. But in this case, I think for Sherrod Brown, what's really strong is the voters were clear about what they wanted to do in Ohio. And now you're going to elect a senator who wants to undermine and disobey what the voters told them to do. No, I don't think so. So I think it's very clear. And then the abortion issue is very strong in Pennsylvania. You not only have Bob Casey, who has become quite forthright on the abortion issue, and you have the AG candidate running. You have a very pro-choice governor who ran on it, who was an AG. So the world has changed. And I think the Republicans, we paid a horrific price for this change, but the world has changed. And I think the Republican candidates are late to the game, and they've been boxed in, and they have been surprised again and again and again at the intensity of this issue.
Linda, if you were one of the debate moderators, what question would you ask Donald Trump about abortion?
I would ask something, and first of all, I would hand my question to Lauren because she has much better questions than I do. But I would ask something about the fact that you repeatedly, time after time after time, take credit for overturning Roe v. Wade, and you, time after time after time, have talked about nominating more judges that are against Roe v. Wade. What do you have to say to the public about that?
Brittany has a good one too.
Brittany, what's your question?
Just, back to the Chris Matthews in 2015 or 2016, where he said a woman should be punished.
Oh, yeah, good question.
Yeah, although he took that back pretty quickly after it, but he said it. So fair game. Bruce Parks, question or comment?
Yeah, it's more a comment on the entire issue. I tend to be pretty libertarian in my thinking, and I just don't see really why this is such an issue. I just don't think that any government agency should be telling a woman what they should be doing with their health care. I just think it's categorically wrong. I don't understand why the Republicans don't step up to that and honor that position of personal rights. I don't get it. On the other hand, I'm not certain that that issue, and I may be wrong about this one, that issue is going to be such that it would cost Trump the election. I don't think it will, but that remains to be seen.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I think
Thank you,
it's a
Bruce.
great
Good.
point. And look, we talked about this a little bit. I think you really have to understand the depth of the engagement of Christian conservatism and evangelical Christianity in Republican politics to understand why this became such a central issue. I mean, we mentioned Reagan, but it's not just Reagan, it's also both Bushes, right? Essentially, Republican politics and evangelical Christianity have been absolutely inseparable since 1980. And I think that's really why it became such a central issue. And it was a winner. I mean, it has been consistently a winner. And, we forgot that, both Bush 41 and 43 were both hugely responsible for the current makeup of the court and the end of Roe, which was very clearly their positions. So, I mean, you can't blame people for the expedient and, impactful political position that won them multiple presidencies and countless numbers of seats. The issue is just that the sands have changed and people just understand it in a totally new way. So, I mean, credit where it's due. They were incredibly successful. And by the way, Mitch McConnell too, whose entire career was built around overturning Roe, and he succeeded. And, good on him for having had a 50-year strategy that they executed, which I think a lot of us on the left are, struggling because we know we're nowhere near having another 50-year strategy to turn it around.
Yeah, I think the other thing that, two things I would say, Bruce, about your comment. First of all, I really wish my parents could come back and meet you, because the thing I grew up with as in a Republican libertarian family was none of your business, butt out, none of your business, as just a refrain. And I think there are a lot of Western Republicans in particular who have that attitude to this day. The second thing I would say is that I just think that we cannot underestimate the impact that this world that we're in, which resembles Handmaiden Tales, is just so different than what anybody imagined was possible. There were some elites who were trying to say this was possible, but people didn't even believe. I did this research in 2016. People didn't believe that Trump was anti-abortion. In fact, I tried to test, and I showed CNN clips where Trump said he would defund Planned Parenthood, and people laughed in the focus groups and said he's probably paid for 3 abortions at Planned Parenthood. What are you talking about? But now there's proof in the pudding, and it's a very different scene.
Katie Reeves, I read your question from the chat earlier, but I see you've got your hand up, and since you're the most powerful person on the call as a Wisconsin voter, I'll ask you.
All hail the Wisconsin voter.
I wanted to weigh in on the question as to why this is such an important question to Republicans, because I feel like it was answered by people that vote left. So as someone that votes right, I wanted to give my opinion, and I don't have super strong opinions on abortion, but as a representative of that side, I would say that we don't view it as a woman's right to choose. We don't view it as my choice, my body, my choice. We don't view it as a medical question. We view it as it is a baby, and you're killing a baby, and you can talk all around it all the ways you want, but that's the way I view it. And I've had people, good friends, that have used it, who have had abortions as a form of birth control. I've had good friends who have had abortions because there was something drastically wrong with the fetus. And I understand both sides, which is why I don't have super strong views. I just wanted to represent that side because I don't think that was given during this call.
Thank you. And I appreciate that. And, I run a bipartisan organization, and I have many pro-life women on my board and some very, very close relationships with women who I deeply respect because we have, shared faith and shared values. And I've always been somebody who deeply understands the moral question that's at the heart of this for many, many people. And I think that's held in a true way for lots and lots of Americans. And I think that's part of why this is such an interesting time, because to your point, we can have these very closely held views about what we feel is right and wrong for ourselves, and also recognize we don't want women to die, because of an ectopic pregnancy, right? So I think that this is why, it is so important, and why I so deeply believe in what we do at Two Way, that we can have these full conversations with people respectfully who have different views, and also, always learn from each other. So thank you for sharing that. And I take it very seriously. And I never assume that someone should agree with me. And by the way, American women don't all agree, right? We're as diverse as the country. You put two women in a room together, we're not going to agree on everything, but I think Celinda is right that for more and more people now in this new world, there is this question about, well, who gets to decide what I believe and who gets to decide what I live, the rules that I live by. And I think that will continue to be a core question on this issue. So thanks for that. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Katie. I agree.
Yeah, Katie, John Cox, I think, represented the point of view earlier. You may not have been on, but I appreciate you doing it. I want to let Celinda talk just to close out and thank everybody for joining. Celinda, just talk about how you see the next few months playing out between now and Election Day. What are we likely to see in terms of messaging, in terms of activities? Today, obviously, there's lots with the vice president and other activities that the campaign and DNC are doing. But how do you see this playing out over the course of the next few months?
Oh, I think it'll play a major issue. It'll play a major issue in initiative states, and those initiatives do overlap some battleground states. It'll play a major issue in Senate races. The Senate races are almost all battlegrounds now on this issue, clear distinctions. And I think it'll play a major role in the presidential as well. And you have Harris, you have Dr. Biden, who has spoken out very strongly on this, and you have Joe Biden, who has spoken out very strongly on this. So it's going to shape up to be a major part of the strategy. And I think, honestly, the strategy right now is to get even on the economy and to win on the abortion issue.
Linda, thank you. And thank you especially for fighting through your cough and for making time.
I'm sorry. I apologize.
No, that's okay. No. We all have gone through that. Very, very determined of you to do it. And Lauren, thank you. Thanks everybody for joining and for participating and for the conversation. And we will be back with another two-way at 6 o'clock tonight. A little bit different than Celinda Lake. It's Rick Grinnell talking about foreign policy and national security. So we hope you can join for that. And we look forward to seeing you all soon, either at 6 o'clock or at another two-way. Thank you again.